welcome to Ignite Day 2, everyone. This is a live interactive session, but it is also being recorded. Do encourage you to come off mute and ask questions or ask questions in chat. Please let me know as well in chat if you can't hear me or if the screen sharing is not coming through correctly. So today we're going to be talking about how to reduce your Azure VMware Solution TCO while increasing agility with Azure NetApp Files data stores. My name is Sean. I'm a technical marketing engineer for Azure NetApp Files. And I'm also joined today by Arndt. He's also a technical marketing engineer, and he'll be the subject matter expert in chat answering questions. And before we get into the demo, I'd like to talk a little bit about just briefly what is Azure NetApp Files. So Azure NetApp Files is a first-party Azure storage service. It's a fully managed file service. We provide NFS and SMB volumes as well as dual protocol volumes. We offer on-premise class performance with multiple storage tiers, including standard, premium, and ultra. Advanced data management capabilities, things like snapshots, clones, replication, and backup are all built into the service. And because this is a first-party service and not a marketplace offering, we have a consistent experience, support, billing, APIs, PowerShell, whatever it is that you like, is all built in and supported by Azure. So today we'll be talking about AVS and how we integrate with AVS. So before this announcement, we were actually able to use Azure NetApp Files with in-guest mounts. So we were able to mount Azure NetApp Files volumes within both Azure native virtual machines as well as AVS guest virtual machines. But recently we announced the ability to use Azure NetApp Files as an AVS data store, which means we can connect ANF volumes directly to the AVS hosts to be able to expand the AVS storage capacity. So why would you use, sorry about that. Why would you use Azure NetApp Files data stores? So first of all, the main reason is we can use Azure NetApp Files data stores to independently scale or decouple the AVS storage from the compute. What this means is that we can expand the AVS storage footprint without having to add additional AVS hosts. So this is really good for storage-heavy workloads that you might be bringing to AVS. Storage-heavy workloads will give you the opportunity to expand storage without having to expand the hosts. In addition to storage-heavy workloads, another great use case for ANF data stores is for DR environments. So if you're using AVS as a disaster recovery site for an on-prem VMware site, we can deploy that minimal AVS cluster size of 3, but still provide enough storage capacity for the entire workload, and then add new hosts should a disaster recovery event occur. So we can lower that DR cost. And then second, Azure NetApp Files offers very easy to manage performance and availability. So by default, Azure NetApp Files is 4 nines SLA. And we are able to scale both performance and capacity non-disruptively to AVS and to the end application. We can scale up and down performance as well as scaling up and down capacity as business requirements change. And finally, we have very easy to manage storage protection and availability. So through things like snapshots and clones, and also built-in cross-region replication as well for ANF. So this allows data management capabilities without having to put additional load or additional resources on your VMware environment. So now that we've talked about why you might want to use AVS, I want to show you a quick demo on how we can use our Azure NetApp Files data store TCO estimator to determine if using Azure NetApp Files is going to make sense for your particular workload. So here we have what's called the Azure NetApp Files data store TCO estimator. And within this tool, we can input the details of our VMware on-prem workload. We can put in those details, and then we get this output that will show us the estimated TCO or TCO savings should we choose to use Azure NetApp Files data stores. We can manually input these fields, or we can also now import an RV Tools file to make that easier to get data into this tool. And then down here, it's going to show you the output. It's going to show you this first row if you did not use Azure NetApp Files data stores, if you completely relied on the built-in vSAN storage, an estimated cost. And then here, we're going to show you the cost savings depending on which tier of Azure NetApp Files storage you choose. And then finally, we're going to show you in this last row, if you're using AVS only as a disaster recovery site with that minimal 3-host cluster that I mentioned before. So you can see there's really significant savings potential there, especially for storage heavy workloads. So now that we've seen why you might use Azure NetApp Files data stores and also how it saves money, I just want to show a quick demo on how we provision Azure NetApp Files data stores. So we've already provisioned an AVS private cloud. It's called AVS ANF Val Cluster, and that's in South Central US. And the first step you're going to do is navigate within the portal to Azure NetApp Files, search for NetApp, choose Azure NetApp Files. And the first step is always going to be to create what's called an Azure NetApp Files account. So our account name is going to be Ignite Demo. And that's going to be in South Central US. Once we have our NetApp account created, we can then create a capacity pool. And the capacity pool, when you create a capacity pool, we have a couple decisions to make here. We're going to give that pool a name. And then we also have to choose what the service level of that pool is, standard, premium, or ultra. In this case, we're going to select ultra for the best performance. And then we're going to give the size of that capacity pool as 8 TIBs. And we're going to leave the quality service type as auto. Quality service type auto just means that the size of the volume that we create will directly impact the performance of that volume. So we'll go ahead and create our capacity pool. And now that that is created, we can create our volume. Now for an Azure NetApp Files data store, it's a one-to-one relationship between volumes and data stores. We'll go ahead and create our volume. This is going to be my data store 0001. We're going to give that a size. In this case, we'll do 4 TIBs. We're going to choose the virtual network that we're provisioning that volume to. In this case, we've already created a VNet, and we've connected that VNet to our AVS private cluster using ExpressRoute Gateway. And it is important to make sure that that gateway, when it's deployed, is deployed with the ultra performance SKU. That'll provide the required bandwidth between the Azure NetApp Files VNet and the AVS private cloud. Next, we'll choose our protocol. We're going to leave that as NFS. And then we want to make sure we check this Azure VMware Solution Data Store checkbox. This will enable this volume to be added to AVS as a data store. We can customize our export policy. This is going to let us restrict which IP addresses or which host ranges are allowed to mount this volume. For today, we're just going to leave that as the default. And then we do need to assign an owner tag in my lab here. So we'll give that tag an owner. And finally, we'll review and create the volume. Looks like Dave is asking, yes, there is a link for the calculator. I'm going to put that in chat now. That's the link to the calculator. So now that we have the volume created, we can come back to the AVS, Azure VMware Solution area, choose our private cloud. And you'll see here there is a storage submenu here. We click on that. And you'll see that there is a menu item here at the top called Connect Azure NetApp Files Volume. So it's from here that you will actually connect our volume as a data store to our AVS private cluster. So we'll select the NetApp account that we created, choose the pool, and finally we'll select the volume name. And we'll choose which cluster we want to attach the data store to. In this case, we're using the default of cluster 1. And then we're going to specify the name. I do like to keep the name, the data store name, the same as the volume name, to avoid any confusion in the future. And this is the data store name. This is the name that it will appear in the within vSphere, within the vSphere client itself. So we'll hit connect, and within a few seconds, that data store will now be connected to our AVS private cluster. So our deployment is complete. And if we take a look here at our vSphere client, we can see down here that the automation automatically took care of mounting that data store to our AVS hosts. And if we click over here on data stores, you'll now see that we have Ignite Data Store 0001. So just within a few minutes, we're able to provision storage to our AVS private cluster. And now we're ready to start migrating workloads to that data store. At this point, it's a data store just like any other data store within AVS. I can right click on a virtual machine, go to migrate, change that storage, select our new Ignite data store, click next, and finally finish. And now we're migrating our workloads over to Azure NetApp Files. Now, if you provision Azure NetApp Files data store and now you determine that you need more capacity or you need more performance, we can go into the Azure portal and simply modify the parameters of that volume to get more performance or capacity, all non-disruptive to AVS. There's a QR code here as well to the calculator if you want that. And I also have a video on YouTube, which is how to deploy the Azure VMware solution with Azure NetApp Files data store. So in this video, I walk through the entire provisioning process, all the way from AVS to configuring the Express Route Gateway, connecting the VNet to the AVS private cloud, and also deploying the Azure NetApp Files data store. And I did want to show too, there is a hierarchy here. So this is kind of how Azure NetApp Files is constructed. You can see at the top, we have a NetApp account. So this is tied to a particular region. And then within that NetApp account, we can deploy several capacity pools. And the capacity pool is going to determine the performance of the volume that you put in that capacity pool. And then finally, down here on the bottom, we have the volumes. Each of these volumes are going to represent a data store. And we have best practices and deployment instructions within learn.microsoft.com as well. So if there are any questions or comments, or if anyone would like to come off mute and ask those questions, or you can put them in chat as well. Yes, I can. Yeah, you're welcome, Michael. Thank you for attending. Appreciate it.